Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. Josh Hasten here, along with Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. And this was a historic week throughout the world as President Donald Trump wins re-election in the U.S. elections that took place last Tuesday. 301 to 226, a landslide victory there in the Electoral College. He also won the popular vote, and the Republicans picked up the Senate and now hold a 53 to 46 majority. They maintain the House. Huge victory for the Republican Party and the re-election of President Donald Trump. And the main question we have here as we sit in Jerusalem is, what does this mean for the state of Israel? Alex.
Well, first of all, I think that there's more people in Israel per capita on a percentage basis that are happy that Donald Trump is the president than there might even be in the United States, right? You saw it was 5 million person gap in the popular vote in the United States, which means it was somewhere as close to the 50-50 mark. Here in Israel, polls before the election showed that 66% of Israelis prefer Trump, 17% of Israelis chose Harris, 17% didn't have a preference. So overwhelming support for Trump here in Israel. I think he's probably more popular in Israel than maybe any other country in the world, and with good reason. We've talked many times on the show about the things that Trump did during his first administration. I don't think we should review all of that right now, because now we need to talk about what could be in a second administration. And while we don't exactly know how Trump will react or what he will do, there's good reason to assume that he's not going to do the things that we knew that the Harris administration would have done, which would include continuing to level sanctions on Israelis, withholding weapons that Israel needs to continue its war efforts, not supporting Israel diplomatically at the United Nations General Assembly, the International Criminal Court, and the International Court of Justice. And so we have to see now what Trump is going to do, what kind of support he'll give Israel to continue its war effort, and how far he'd be willing to go against the Iranian regime.
So the president has made it clear that he doesn't want to start wars, he wants to end wars. But how is that different from the Biden-Harris administration? The Biden-Harris administration was talking about a ceasefire, partial ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire. And according to Elizabeth Pipko, who was a Trump campaign spokeswoman, Trump says that he expects Israel to end the war by winning it 100%. That's how he always talks about ending wars. Let's go out to the video.
He also said, I'm not going to start a war, I'm going to stop wars. So from an Israeli perspective, does that mean that he expects Israel to end the war against Hezbollah in Lebanon and to end the war against Hamas in Gaza?
I would say he expects them to end it by winning it 100%. That's how he always talks about ending wars. I do believe he wants the war to end as soon as possible, like all rational people do, but he wants it to end with a decisive victory.
So there you have Elizabeth Pipko from the Republican Party, Trump spokeswoman. Again, winning the war, not just a temporary ceasefire, not ending the war just to end it, but a decisive Israeli victory.
I think that's really important, okay, because everybody talks about wanting the war to end. And so there's two different approaches here. The approach number one is the Biden administration, Harris administration approach, which is immediate ceasefire. Immediate ceasefire means that Hamas is left in place and has the opportunity to rebuild. Hezbollah is left in place, has the opportunity to rebuild and regroup. Okay, and it's basically a guarantee that in the next 6 to 24 months, you're going to have another conflict. The way of what Pipko was talking about, which is a swift and decisive victory, means stop holding Israel back, okay? It has to be understood that the Biden administration slowed down the war effort to an unbelievable degree, okay? In every case, from the beginning, don't put a ground operation. Don't go into the Al-Shifa hospital. Don't go into Rafah. Don't take the Philadelphia corridor. Every time they said don't, what that meant was that Israel had to slow down, make the case, and everything took much longer. What the Trump campaign is talking about here is a swift and decisive Israeli victory. such that every party in the region, including Hamas, including Hezbollah, including Iran, including Qatar, and we'll talk about them too, and the Saudis and the Emiratis and Bahrain, that everybody understands that Israel won the war decisively, that Hamas is no longer a political or a military force inside the Gaza Strip. They have no opportunity to rebuild. Hezbollah has no opportunity to restock their weapons, hopefully even gets kicked out of the political system inside Lebanon. And Iran knows that they have lost the war in such a way that you have now transformed the Middle East such that there will not be a restarting of this war, not in 6 months, not in 24 months, but hopefully not in 2 decades. And then what happens is you're able to turn around and to get back onto the path that the Trump administration was on in its first term in office, which was the Abraham Accords track, the normalization agreements that were signed with Bahrain and the Emirates and Morocco, which now could include the Saudis, could include Oman, could include Kuwait, could include a lot of other countries once it's understood clearly that Israel has won the war and Iran is no longer a threat to regional stability.
So Prime Minister Netanyahu was one of the first world leaders to congratulate President Trump. They had a 20-minute conversation. At the same time, President Trump did speak to PA President Mahmoud Abbas on Friday. From what I understand, the call was, quote, warm and general. Again, I don't think they've spoken for a very long time. I think it's been years since Trump spoke to Abbas. But do you think that this is highly significant that Abbas is being brought back into the picture? Are we seeing a future where Trump perhaps decides to revive the Palestinian Authority, which essentially has been on the sidelines throughout Israel's war? Obviously, they've supported Hamas and they've sided against the state of Israel, but they've been pretty much persona non grata for over the last year or so. Does Trump want to revitalize the Palestinian Authority?
Yeah.
Or are we reading too much into that?
We've seen some reports in the media this week that new Trump administration means the revival of the, quote, deal of the century, which was a deal that dramatically favored Israel over the Palestinian Authority, but at the same time would have further canonized the rule over the Palestinian Authority over these areas A and B and much of Area C inside Judea and Samaria, which would have given the Palestinian Authority an official statelet, a state minus, as Netanyahu would call it. And Netanyahu did agree to this in principle. And, you know, we have to see what happens here with the results of this war. But at this point in time, you know, no kind of state should be the reward for what took place on October 7th. And for the Palestinians living in Judea and Samaria, which is commonly called the West Bank, they supported what happened on October 7th.
80%.
Right. And the Palestinian Authority continues to fund the murder of Jews and continues to pay the murderers of Jews sitting in Israeli prisons, paying money to the families of those terrorists that were killed in the act of first-degree murder. So definitely concerning on the one hand that Trump did reach out to, even within days of winning the election, to Mahmoud Abbas. But at the same time, a little bit too early to tell what exactly that means. And maybe, maybe he's just trying to demonstrate that he's in charge and is now making the rounds to the entire region and letting them know that it could be the opposite of what you think. It could be that the Biden administration is now saying to Abbas or to others in this lame duck period that they're going to do certain things to help the Palestinians to go against Israel. Maybe Trump was calling immediately and telling Abbas, you better watch it. Don't push anything at the United Nations right now. Don't think that you've got a free pass in this 70-day period before I come into office, because anything that you do, if I don't like it, I'm either going to undo it or I'm going to penalize you for it. So we don't exactly know what went down in that call. And we have to see. Wait to see.
Yeah, you mentioned this period now. I mean, we have to remember this is President-elect Trump. He doesn't take over until January the 20th. So here you still have the Biden-Harris administration still in charge in the United States. And I think we'll talk a little bit about Blinken. And he's still making the rounds, wanting to secure some sort of deal to end this war. So Trump is not 100% in charge. There's still a gap here. So, what do you think we can expect over the next couple months. You just touched on it briefly. Until January 20th, there's still a period here.
There's a lot of things that
could happen. Yeah, for sure.
So first of all, Netanyahu has been reportedly nervous about arrest warrants that could be issued at the International Criminal Court, the ICC. There's still the case open brought by South Africa against Israel for genocide in the Gaza Strip. There are the resolutions that could be passed against Israel at the UN General Assembly and the Security Council. In fact, it's rumored that, or reported that Netanyahu may be dispatching one of his top envoys, Ron Dermer, to the United States towards negotiating some kind of temporary ceasefire with Lebanon and Hezbollah in order to try to prevent the Security Council from passing some kind of resolution against Israel during this lame duck transition period. And you will remember back in 2016 that before Trump took office the first time, that the Obama administration allowed a resolution to pass against Israel, censuring Israel for continued growth of the so-called settlements, the Jewish communities living in Judea and Samaria, like the type of place where you live. Suburban Jewish housing is the obstacle to peace in the Middle East, according to this viewpoint. So there's a lot of things that can happen in this period. And Trump can use some leverage against these bodies, warning them very clearly that if they do pass resolutions or acts against the state of Israel, that they could be penalized financially during the Trump administration. All of these bodies, and especially the United Nations, rely on a tremendous amount of funding from the United States. The United Nations has its headquarters in New York City. Trump could expel the United Nations from the United States if he wanted. He can certainly defund them. So they should know that if they act against one of President Trump's allies, that they can pay the price for that.
So as the world's attention was focused on the elections in the United States, Prime Minister Netanyahu, on that very day, last Tuesday, decides he's going to fire Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Again, very slick move, very slick political move, while no one was really paying attention to what was going on here in Israel. The prime minister said the following. He said, Defense Minister Gallant and I had substantial disagreements on the management of the military campaign, disagreements which were accompanied by public statements and actions that contravened the decisions of the cabinet and security cabinet, said Netanyahu. And Gallant then held a press conference of his own, saying that the differences also included the ultra-Orthodox recruitment into the IDF, ceasefire talks with Hamas, and his belief that Israel needs to open up an investigation into the failures of October 7, 2023. So a little bit of a discrepancy there in terms of the reasoning, according to Netanyahu, why he fired Gallant. And then Gallant's retort there in his press conference explaining why he believes he was fired. You have criticism of Netanyahu, people saying, oh, you shouldn't fire the defense minister in the middle of the war. And then Netanyahu essentially saying, well, Gallant wasn't on board in terms of what my goals were in expelling Hamas, finishing the job down in Gaza. So that's why he had to do it.
Right. And it's no secret that Netanyahu wanted Gallant sacked all the way back, I guess, about 14, 15 months when Gallant came out and publicly called for Netanyahu to pull back the judicial reforms. It wasn't that he thought that the judicial reforms should be shelved. It was more about how he did it. He waited until Netanyahu left the country on a state visit, and Netanyahu held his last meeting before boarding the plane with Gallant, and the two had apparently agreed that Gallant would wait the 48 hours until Netanyahu got back in order for them to continue discussing the issue. And basically, as soon as Netanyahu got on board the plane, Gallant called a press conference and called for the judicial reforms to be shelved. And that sparked even larger protests in the country. Netanyahu announced that he was going to fire Gallant almost on the spot. What happened next? Even much larger protests. The largest protests in the entire judicial reform protest movement took place when Netanyahu announced that he was going to fire Gallant. So Netanyahu never went through with the formal sacking of the defense minister. He never handed in the official notice of dismissal. And he actually wound up pulling back much of the judicial reform in order to calm the street and to get order back in the country. From that time, the two of them really did not have a very strong relationship. And we did see at numerous points along the way that Netanyahu and Gallant saw differently with regard to the war. I mean, the most famous episode took place about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, when Gallant wanted for Israel to leave the Philadelphia corridor between Gaza and Egypt. Now, this is the corridor under which there were some almost 50 tunnels going back and forth from Gaza into Egypt. This is where a lot of smuggling took place. Netanyahu and others and other security experts held that in order to make sure that Hamas does not restock its supplies, to make sure that Hamas leaders and even hostages don't get smuggled across the border, that Israel needed to hold on to this Philadelphia corridor. Now, the United States wanted Israel out of the corridor, right? Okay. And so Gallant sided with the United States. What did Netanyahu do? He called a vote in his cabinet, and there was a vote of basically 8-1 in favor of maintaining presence in the Philadelphia corridor. The one dissenting vote was Gallant. Now, that's not a problem. You can be the dissenting vote in a cabinet. But what happened immediately after the vote, Gallant starts tweeting that the vote was the wrong move and that the next day called for the cabinet to be convened to vote on the issue again. Okay, so you can vote however you want inside the cabinet. That's fine. It can be 8-1. But the second that there's a vote that's taken, and it was a nearly unanimous vote, 8-1, okay? You have to, at that point, maintain coalition discipline. You have to stand with the cabinet. You say, I was not in favor of that move, but I, as the defense minister, will execute the desire of the cabinet. And that's not what he did. And there were numerous occasions like that. And even after his dismissal, Gallant immediately met with the parents and the families of the hostage for him. And what did he tell them? He told them that there was at this point no reason for the IDF to maintain a presence inside the Gaza Strip. Okay, which is clearly not what the prime minister and those who support the prime minister want. He had called about 2 weeks ago for. He had mentioned that there was going to be the upcoming withdrawal of troops from southern Lebanon. Okay. Now, when we talk about total victory, it is clear that Gallant was not on the same page with Netanyahu about what total victory is. Now, the firing was very significant. I think it determines that Netanyahu is going to continue the war with force. It happened just in the moments when it was rumored that Iran could strike Israel once again, and we can talk about the fact that that didn't happen as a result of the Trump victory. But it's clear that there was probably a difference here between the way Netanyahu and Gallant saw a potential war with Iran. So an important moment and an opportunity for Netanyahu to fire Gallant. And of course, the timing in which he did it was brilliant. He did it on election day itself, when it was clear that the Biden administration and more importantly, all of the international media, even including much of the Israeli media, had no choice but to be focused on the election, moving this story, which otherwise in a quiet time would have went right to the top of the news cycle, was on page 2 of the news cycle. There were protests that night after Gallant was fired. The media was calling for people openly to protest Gallant's sacking. There were tens of thousands of people that came out, but nothing like what we saw a year and a half ago. And since that time, it's been quiet. So it looks like Netanyahu has gotten away with firing his defense minister. And by bringing Gideon Sa'ar in, finally, as the foreign minister, Yisrael Katz moves from the foreign minister over to the defense ministry. What happens is that Netanyahu now has a 68-member strong right-wing coalition. It is the government that Netanyahu should have had from the very beginning after the Israeli elections. So Netanyahu basically won the real election that he should have won back then on the day that Trump got elected himself. So Netanyahu is also the winner of this U.S. election day, and now has the government he wants, now has no more opposing forces inside his coalition. And the only people that are complaining that Gallant got fired are the opposition. It's only Yair Lapid, it's only Benny Gantz that are complaining, only Avigdor Lieberman that are complaining that Gallant was fired. And if you'll remember, when Benny Gantz pulled out of this so-called unity government, not only did the war effort get harmed in any way, everything moved along a lot more smoothly, a lot more forcefully. But even at that time, Benny Gantz, Yair Lapid called for Gallant to leave the government as well. So they didn't want him to stay in the government because they thought he was propping up Netanyahu. But then, of course, when Netanyahu fires Gallant, those same people that call for Gallant to leave the government are claiming that Netanyahu's move was irresponsible. So hopefully a very good move, very important move for Netanyahu that took place on election day. And now Israel has this strong majority right-wing government that should have been in place from the very beginning.
Netanyahu is certainly a master politician, whether you like him or not, whether you agree with his policies or not. And as you said, most importantly, stability for a long time to come.
And then the next election is not until October 2026. Yeah. Okay, so Netanyahu has basically secured himself as the prime minister with a solid right-wing majority now, probably for the next 2 years, which is unbelievable considering the events of October 7th, just over a year ago. The idea that Netanyahu will be stronger now than he was in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, I think just speaks to his deftness as a politician, his ability to persecute the war in a way that most Israelis are satisfied with, and being the king of the Israeli political system.
No doubt about it. And let's move on now. This probably could have been top story. Israelis were brutally attacked in nothing short of a pogrom, a premeditated pogrom in Amsterdam. Here we are in the year 2024. We just commemorated Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, carried out by the Nazis against the Jews in Germany all the way back in the 1930s. And here you have dozens of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans who attended a soccer match between Maccabi and a club from Amsterdam, Ajax. That's how you pronounce it. And this was not a spontaneous attack, even though you have Israel haters out there who are claiming that this was spontaneous. This was a response to something that Maccabi Tel Aviv
Israelis were yelling at the Arabs.
Yeah. So one guy pulls down a so-called Palestinian flag, and all of a sudden you have riots on your hands. No, this was a premeditated attack. You saw communication. It's now being reported on WhatsApp between those Uber drivers in Amsterdam. They were coordinating amongst each other where the Israelis were going to be, where the Israelis were staying, which hotels they were at. They were walking in the streets of Amsterdam, asking to see people's passports, finding the Israelis, finding the Jews, and beating them to the point where Israel had to send had to send planes, rescue planes on Shabbat, and Mada had to go over and help treat those who were wounded. And there are now reports indicating that perhaps Iran was actually behind these attacks in Amsterdam. They helped coordinate these attacks. That's the latest out of Amsterdam. And thank God, all the Israelis, from what I understand, are back at home. But the attacks carried out by 100 men of Arab and Muslim origin there in Amsterdam. It's not safe for Jews in Europe here 80 or so years after the Holocaust. Unbelievable.
Yeah, you would have thought that Amsterdam would be a place where Israelis could go and not have to worry about their security. Which are the cities in Europe that Israelis can go now?
Not many.
You can go to Budapest, you can go to Prague, you can go to Krakow, and it'll be fine. These are the places that those in the West say these are the far right locations. Even these left wing Israelis say these are the far right places. You talk about Geert Wilders, the head of the ruling party in the Netherlands, is the far right ruler and the far right rulers are the ones that are saying we want to protect the memory of the Holocaust. We want to strengthen our relationship with the state of Israel. And here the far left governments in Western Europe are the ones that have invited all of the Muslim communities in. They're losing their countries, they're losing their cultures to this mass Muslim immigration. You could suggest maybe they didn't want Jews, and as a result, in World War II, and as a result, what did they get? I don't know, but you see that it's not safe. It's not safe, and if it was Iran that was behind it, you can understand that Iran is trying to attack Jews from wherever source they can, wherever they can find them. And at this point, I think it is important that people understand if Iran was behind it, because the case against Iran has to be made in a way that's very, very strong at this point, such that everybody understands that Iran is the number one source today of not just regional instability, but global instability. Now, expanding their reach towards the destabilization of Western Europe. It'll be interesting to see how many arrests are made. There were reports that some 62 arrests were made. I've seen other reports that those arrests were made before and during the soccer match, not after the soccer match. So we have to see now what kind of investigations are performed and who's arrested and what will be the repercussions for what was basically a mini pogrom that took place on Israelis just going to attend the soccer match.
Yeah, and from what I saw, only a handful of people are still in police custody, but it remains to be seen how the Dutch handle what happened to Israelis, Jews, who were simply going to a soccer game in Amsterdam. Here's some positive news. Maybe this is too little too late, but Qatar, under U.S. pressure, has decided that it is going to potentially throw Hamas leadership out of their country at this point, as Hamas has rejected every negotiations between Israel and Qatar serving as a mediator with Egypt. Hamas has rejected every negotiation to come to any type of ceasefire with Israel time and time again. And now the United States is basically saying, well, Qatar, if Hamas isn't willing to agree to anything, it's time for them to go. It's time for them to be thrown out of the country. But Qatar has been harboring Hamas leadership for years and years and years. So now this is happening all of a sudden, again, with this dead period, so to speak, in between administrations in the United States. But, I mean, is this too little too late? Is this symbolic? What do you think is going on here in Qatar?
I think this is a result of the elections. It's clear that President Trump is going to hold Qatar accountable for harboring Hamas terror leaders in their country, and has told them, you better get them out of your country. Now, it could be reported and rumored that the current administration is the ones that wants them out, but obviously the United States was under Biden was turning to Qatar as a important mediator and negotiator of the hostage crisis, which obviously didn't produce very much since that initial release in the last several months. Nothing. But Qatar has a lot to lose. And this just demonstrates that if the United States uses the leverage that it has over the bad malign actors, that you can get a lot done. But if you're kissing up to the wrong countries, the ones that are actually causing the instability, and you're bowing down to them, and you don't use your leverage, then they get away with murder. And this is exactly what's happened in Qatar. The United States is a very large military base in Qatar. Mm-hmm. The United States could remove that base from Qatar and could, if they want to have a strong presence in the Middle East, they could shift that base over to the United Arab Emirates, to a country that has demonstrated itself to be a very loyal and strong ally of the United States, and also has already signed a normalization agreement with the state of Israel. So the United States can make it clear, if you play friends with the United States, if you play friends with Israel, then there can be a lot of benefits. But if you're going to harbor terrorists in your country, then there's going to be a lot of punishment for that. So I think this is just like the first indication of what a new regime in the United States could mean. And so you see, all of a sudden, all it takes is one phone call. We talked about Netanyahu calling Abbas. All it takes is one phone call from Trump calling Abbas. All it takes is one phone call to Qatar, and then all of a sudden, Qatar says, "Oh yeah, we're gonna kick Hamas out of the country." It doesn't take much.
We alluded to this before, this lame duck period in between the Biden administration and the future Trump administration, but the U.S. is still trying for a ceasefire. Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, continuing his diplomacy tour, reaching out and trying to secure some sort of deal during this lame duck period. So they're still at it. The Americans are still trying to come to some sort of ceasefire, even though, as we've said now several times, lame duck Trump administration taking over.
This is the part of the lame duck period is very dangerous for Israel, because Blinken and others, they still wield influence for the next 70 days, and they can be trying to force Israel to do things that are not in its interest to do, and threatening them, by saying that they will not provide any cover for Israel in the UN Security Council, at the International Criminal Court, at the International Court of Justice, etc. There's a lot that can be done to harm Israel. So, it should be at this point that the Biden administration should say, we'll let the next administration deal with it, but clear that that's not going to be the case.
Just another example here of, as you were just talking about, organizations coming after the state of Israel. One I've never heard of before, the Independent Famine Review Committee, the FRC. Never heard of them, but they said on Friday, they issued an alert that Israel is carrying out a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. There's an imminent famine in parts of Gaza as a result of Israeli policy. Israel completely rejecting that, citing all these sources, the number of trucks going in, whether you agree with that or not. 840,000 tons of food over the last several months, 39,000 trucks, all these statistics Israel citing, saying, you're lying. It's not true. There's no famine in Gaza. But again, just like the ICC or any of these other organizations, the UN, UNRWA, another organization coming and
I think
bashing Israel.
Reported even this morning that Lloyd Austin, the current Secretary of Defense, has reported even today or yesterday that Israel's not doing enough with regard to humanitarian aid, that Israel needs to do more. So you're going to see a lot of pressure now get put on Israel. I just saw some kind of major two-page spread in a prominent British publication, I believe. I'm forgetting which one, about the freshwater crisis inside the Gaza Strip, and saying that this entire war is about freshwater. So trying to create new premises for why Israel went into Gaza to begin with, kind of ignoring that this October 7th massacre with the murder of 1,200 people and the kidnapping of 250 others and the injuring of about 6,000 other people ever happened. It was all about freshwater. This is all about ethnic cleansing. This is all about genocide, right? Even though Israel has done more to prevent civilian casualties with the absolute lowest proportion of civilians killed to militants in the history of warfaring, and is particularly in urban warfare, where the enemy is a terror organization that is specifically acting to use its civilians as human shields, hoping that as many civilians as possible get killed. Even in those circumstances, Israel has done more than any other military to prevent civilian casualties. So this is the difficulty of this period, and we have to. Israel's going to have to walk a fine line here, trying to appease. You might see Israel try to appease the outgoing Biden administration during these 70 days, just hoping that if they slow things down and appease, that the situation won't be as bad, knowing that in 70 days, when Trump is inaugurated into office, then they can ramp up again and finish the job and finish it quickly.
Yeah, but in the meantime, war continues in Gaza. War continues in the north against Hezbollah and Lebanon. Just a quick Lebanon war update. The IDF discovering a mobile missile system aimed at the Galilee Panhandle during raids in southern Lebanon this past week. Ready for launch, system 24 rockets discovered. The IAF continues to strike Hezbollah targets both in Syria and in Lebanon. At the same time, Hezbollah fired over 40 rockets at Israel on Saturday, according to the IDF, and they continue to fire rockets. My phone's still ringing as we are here recording this podcast.
Yeah, so we're definitely still in a raging war with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, Israel has managed to create a buffer zone along the border. At this point, from what I understand, the buffer zone is something like 5 kilometers deep, which is not as far as the Litani River, which is what we were talking about, which in some cases could be like as much as 17 kilometers deep into southern Lebanon. Also, what's happened in southern Lebanon is that as the IDF has pushed in and they've taken over a lot of these communities in southern Lebanon, these Radwan forces that were believed to be like a much better and highly trained force than the Nukba forces in Gaza, the Hamas's elite forces, what have they done? While there have been firefights and Israel has lost soldiers in southern Gaza, a lot of these Radwan force members and the Hezbollah paramilitary, they have retreated up into northern Lebanon, places where it's much more difficult for the IDF to strike, particularly as the Biden administration has pressed Israel not to strike northern areas in Beirut and around Beirut because, again, of the densely populated civilian areas. And in this way, it's a dangerous situation because while Israel's creating that buffer zone, yes, they're leaving in place until now much of Hezbollah's paramilitary. And it's going to be really important at some point before the end of this war for Israel to much more seriously degrade the troop buildup that Hezbollah has. They have, the IDF has degraded much of the long-range missiles, but Hezbollah, of course, still has some long-range missiles, some precision-guided missiles. They also have a serious paramilitary force that Israel has not yet been able to take out.
We've talked about Trump. We've talked about Iran. Now let's put the two together. Department of Justice over the weekend saying it has thwarted an Iranian plot to murder President-elect Donald Trump in the weeks leading up to the election. There were several people arrested. And at the same time, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard posted a video threatening to kill Trump. So a direct threat. We saw the attempted assassination when President Trump was at a campaign rally. And now we have perhaps a second attempt by Iran itself, a plot to murder Donald Trump, which was uncovered by the Department of Justice.
Well, I think this is good news that this is coming out because we know Trump, the personality, and he takes things personally. And here to see that the Justice Department under the previous administration is reporting this. It's not his campaign people saying it. This is the Justice Department report. If it's true, that Iran did in some way attempt or make movements toward the assassination of President Donald Trump, that Trump will see, okay, these people want to get me. And I think that Trump, you can just imagine Trump saying, well, if they wanted to get me, well, I'm going to get them. And he'll say, they tried to get me. I'm not going to try. I'm going to do it. And of course, he's got the backing of the U.S. military to get it done. And so I think it's just good that all this is coming out. I do want to move back for 1 minute to this American election and what it means to have Trump in office. I think we're getting to the point where it is time for Netanyahu and Israel to much more clearly define what this term total victory means. There was a lot of things that, was understood Netanyahu believed or wanted, but wasn't sure if he was going to be able to get it, and certainly wasn't willing to say it. When you talk about the Gaza Strip, whether Israel will take some of the land back that it evacuated in 2005, particularly in the northern Gaza Strip, will Israel actually take some of the land away from the Gazan people so that the Gazans understand that you attack Israel and what do you lose in return? You lose land. Will the border between Gaza and Egypt be opened, or will some other arrangement get made to allow those Gazans that want to leave the Gaza Strip ability to get out? The Biden administration prevented that. Will Israel be able to ensure that Hamas is no longer a political and a military force inside the Gaza Strip, like the complete annihilation of Hamas? And then in southern Lebanon, also, what does it mean? Can Israel demand that Hezbollah no longer be a part of the Lebanese parliament? Right, that they're no longer a political force in that country at all. In fact, rescuing Lebanon from Hezbollah's grasp as a political force. And what does it mean with regard to Iran? Does that mean the elimination of the nuclear facilities? These are things that Netanyahu hasn't been able to say. And we'll see if in the next upcoming period, if these are things that Netanyahu is going to be willing to say and how much backing Trump is going to be willing to give Netanyahu, either to accomplish by himself. Israel's always said, just give us the tools, we'll defend ourselves by ourselves, or even will the United States get involved? And I still would never rule out the possibility at this point that American troops will be used, not troops on the ground, but rather the American Air Force will ultimately eliminate some of these deep underground Iranian nuclear facilities.
So one of the key figures who is going to be in the room for many of these discussions between Israel and the United States is Yechiel Leiter, the Scranton, Pennsylvania-born rabbi, former chief of staff to Prime Minister Netanyahu, was appointed as Israel's new ambassador to the United States. I've met Yechiel Leiter on many occasions, and he's an unbelievable individual, very, very talented, very eloquent in terms of his speaking abilities, in terms of policy, a big supporter of the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. Unfortunately, he lost a son in Gaza in November, fell in battle. Very, very sad. But Netanyahu sending Yechiel Leiter to Washington, D.C. as Israel's new ambassador.
Yeah, very capable. Okay. Actually, in this studio over the Sukkot holiday, our good friend in Florida, Gabe Groisman, who has his own podcast on Rumble called Standpoint, used our studios, brought Yechiel in, did an exclusive and extensive interview with Yechiel Leiter. We're actually going to be posting that interview later today on the JNS channel for people to get to know who Yechiel Leiter is. Very capable, very sharp, very eloquent, a perfect alignment for Netanyahu, who's obviously speaks very well in both in Hebrew and in English. Also, Ron Dermer. I think they are going to work very, very well together. And it's good to know that Michael Herzog, who is Isaac Herzog's brother, the president's brother, and you can ask the question, how does the president's brother get appointed to be an ambassador to the United States? Well, that's what happened when Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett were running the show. People talk about, Netanyahu getting cigars from friends. Okay. Nepotism, okay? That just doesn't look good. But Netanyahu was forced to keep Herzog in place, specifically because you had the Biden administration in office, because Netanyahu needed Herzog's support as a mediator during the judicial reforms crisis. Now that Trump is going to be in office, the same way Netanyahu just took Gallant out, this is another move that Netanyahu made to get his own guy inside this key position. Remember, Ron Dermer held this position beforehand. Dermer was previously a very senior advisor to Netanyahu, came back, is now on the war cabinet. So Netanyahu wants to have a very close advisor and trusted confidant in this position. He's put Yechiel Leiter in. I think it's a good move. It's a good move for Israel, and I think he's going to be very effective.
We certainly wish Ambassador Leiter much success. A lot to be done over the course of the next several months and the next 4 years. And
when we talk about ambassadors, also the question is also who is President Trump going to appoint as ambassador? We don't know who he's going to appoint into key positions, including Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense. It just came out today that Trump said that he will not appoint former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo either back into that position or into Secretary of Defense, as he was rumored. Now, he probably would have been a great candidate to do that. Also, that he will not appoint Nikki Haley, who was the former ambassador to the United Nations and did a great job. Both of those individuals are very popular here in Israel for their defense and strengthening of the state of Israel. Who will Trump appoint into key positions in his administration, and particularly who will he appoint to be ambassador to Israel? And I would say that the front runner at this point most likely is David Friedman, the previous ambassador. Questions of whether Friedman wanted to take that post again, but I think that there's a good chance that he could be back here, and I could see the pairing of Leiter and Friedman, counterpart pairing, being a very good one for these two countries.
I just started reading Ambassador Friedman's book over the weekend, One Jewish State, and I think that would be a blueprint as to how Ambassador Friedman views the situation here in Israel.
Exactly. That's what we're talking about. It's like laying out what the policy should be, not just like going one step at a time. It's time now to map out what the U.S.-Israel relationship looks like, what Israel's position in the Middle East looks like, what Iran's position in the Middle East is or isn't in the future, getting this Abraham Accords that were stalled by the Biden administration back on track. But the only way that's going to happen is with a conclusive Israeli victory over Iran and its terror proxies. We mentioned the interview with Yechiel Leiter here. It was only about a week ago. Carolyn Glick, senior contributing editor here at JNS, interviewed David Friedman from the studio. So you see, this is the studio where important conversations with important individuals take place. So go check out those two interviews, and you'll learn a lot more about those individuals and how they might affect policy for the state of Israel and for the United States.
And on that note, after a very, very busy week, we are out of time here on Jerusalem Minute. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News, here with Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. Go to JNS TV to watch the interview with David Friedman. Check out later on today the interview, Gabe Grossman's interview with Yechiel Leiter, and all the amazing content on JNS TV. Go to jns.org for all the latest news from Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world. Big shout out to Ryan Lifshitz for all the work he does here behind the scenes. Amazing, amazing job he's doing. And Zach Sickerman for everything he does, our producer. Have a great week, everybody. Continue to pray for the well-being of the brave men and women of the IDF who are protecting us on 7 different fronts here in the state of Israel. From Jerusalem, Israel's eternal capital, signing out. Have a great week, everybody.